He was called one of the most dangerous men in America. A criminal, a minister, a revolutionary, and finally, a global voice for human rights. This is the story of Malcolm X, a man who turned pain into power and changed the course of American history. Malcolm X was one of the most powerful and controversial figures of the 20th century. To some, he was a radical who spoke with too much anger. To others, he was a fearless truth-teller who said what millions of Black Americans felt but were rarely allowed to say. His life was not simple. It was a journey through violence, racism, crime, prison, faith, transformation, and political awakening. He was born Malcolm Little on May 19, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska. His parents, Earl and Louise Little, were strong believers in Black pride and self-reliance. They supported the ideas of Marcus Garvey, who encouraged African Americans to build their own communities and reject the idea that they were inferior. But in America during the 1920s and 1930s, Black activism often came with deadly consequences. Malcolm's family was repeatedly threatened by white supremacist groups. After moving to Lansing, Michigan, their home was burned down. Then, in 1931, his father died in what officials called a streetcar accident. But Malcolm's family believed he had been murdered. This tragedy pushed the family deeper into poverty and fear. His mother struggled to care for the children, and after years of hardship, she was placed in a mental institution. Malcolm and his siblings were separated and sent into foster care. These early experiences shaped Malcolm deeply. He was bright, outspoken, and did well in school. But he learned early that talent alone would not protect him from racism. When he told a teacher he wanted to become a lawyer, he was told that this was not a realistic goal for a Black boy. That moment stayed with him. It showed him that no matter how capable he was, America had already placed limits on what it believed he could become. As a teenager, Malcolm moved to Boston to live with his half-sister and later to Harlem in New York City. There, he entered a world of nightlife, gambling, drugs, theft, and hustling. He worked different jobs, but he was also pulled into the criminal underworld. He became known for his flashy style, quick intelligence, and rebellious personality. For a while, he lived fast and dangerously, moving from one risky situation to another. In 1946, at the age of 20, Malcolm was arrested for burglary and sentenced to prison. It seemed like his life had hit rock bottom. But prison became the place where he began rebuilding himself. He read constantly, studying history, religion, philosophy, politics, and language. He even copied the dictionary by hand to strengthen his vocabulary. This period transformed him from a street hustler into a disciplined thinker. While in prison, Malcolm was introduced to the Nation of Islam, led by Elijah Muhammad. The movement preached Black pride, self-discipline, economic independence, and separation from white society. For Malcolm, it offered answers to the pain and injustice he had known all his life. He embraced its teachings completely. When he was released in 1952, he left behind the name Malcolm Little and became Malcolm X. The X represented the African name his ancestors had lost during slavery. It was a symbol of resistance and identity. Malcolm quickly became one of the Nation of Islam's most powerful ministers. His speeches were sharp, passionate, and unforgettable. He helped grow the movement in cities across the country, especially in Detroit, Chicago, and Harlem. Malcolm spoke with a force that demanded attention. At a time when many civil rights leaders focused on patience, integration, and nonviolence, Malcolm offered a very different message. He argued that Black Americans had the right to defend themselves. He believed freedom should not be begged for but taken. His phrase, "by any means necessary," became one of the most famous statements in American political history. He was especially powerful because he exposed racism as a national problem, not just a Southern one. He spoke about police brutality, poverty, white supremacy, and the mental damage caused by racism. He told Black Americans to reject shame, rediscover pride, and take control of their own future. His words inspired many people, especially young Black Americans who were tired of waiting for justice. But Malcolm's rise also brought conflict. Many white Americans saw him as a dangerous extremist. Even some Black leaders were uncomfortable with his style and criticism of nonviolence. He often attacked the strategy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., believing that peaceful protest alone was too weak against violent oppression. Still, Even his critics had to admit that Malcolm had a rare power. He made people listen. By the early 1960s, Malcolm had become the public face of the Nation of Islam. But behind the scenes, he was changing. He became increasingly troubled by reports of misconduct involving Elijah Muhammad. He also grew frustrated with the nation's refusal to play a larger role in the broader civil rights struggle. Then, after President John F. Kennedy's assassination in 1963, Malcolm made a controversial remark that led to his suspension from public speaking. In 1964, Malcolm officially left the Nation of Islam. It was one of the biggest turning points of his life. He was now stepping away from the movement that had rebuilt him and made him famous. But he was also beginning to think more independently than ever before. That same year, Malcolm traveled to Mecca to perform the Hajj, the sacred Islamic pilgrimage. The experience transformed him again. In Mecca, he saw Muslims of different races praying together as equals. He met people with white skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes who treated him with sincerity and brotherhood. This challenged his previous belief that all white people were inherently evil. After Mecca, Malcolm adopted the name El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz. His views became broader and more global. He still spoke fiercely against racism in America, but he began to frame the black struggle not just as a civil rights issue, but as a human rights issue. He connected the experience of black Americans to anti-colonial movements in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. His message became more mature, more international, and even more dangerous to those who feared change. In his final months, Malcolm knew he was under threat. He received death threats. His home was firebombed. Tensions with the Nation of Islam had become severe. But he kept speaking, organizing, and traveling, determined to keep evolving and telling the truth as he saw it. On February 21, 1965, Malcolm X was preparing to speak at the Audubon Ballroom in New York City when he was assassinated. He was only 39 years old. His wife and daughters were present. His death shocked the nation, but it did not silence his voice. Later that year, the autobiography of Malcolm X, written with Alex Haley, was published. It became one of the most influential books in American history. Through it, new generations discovered not just a speaker or activist, but a man who transformed himself again and again. Malcolm X's legacy endures because his life was about more than anger. It was about awakening. It was about confronting hard truths, reclaiming identity, and refusing to accept injustice as normal. He showed that a person can come from trauma, make serious mistakes, educate themselves, change their beliefs, and still leave a powerful mark on the world. Malcolm X forced America to face realities it wanted to ignore. He challenged the nation, and he challenged himself. And that may be his greatest legacy of all, the courage to keep growing, even when the world wants to trap you inside one version of yourself.